Welcome back to other stories now. It's been quite a day of protests in Israel, with people blocking roads as police use water cannons try to clear a major highway. Authorities succeeded in arresting at least 42 people. The chaos centers around a bill to remove the power of the Supreme Court to review ministers' decisions passed its first reading in Parliament Monday night.
Police stormed into a crowd of protesters in Tel Aviv on Tuesday morning, using water cannons, hoping to break up the protests and return normalcy. The demonstrators flocked the roads and highways in numerous locations after a bill that would curb some of the Supreme Court's power won initial approval by Parliament, with full support of Netanyahu's hard-right ruling coalition. Commanding 64 of the Knesset's 120 seats, Netanyahu's coalition won the first of 3 required votes for the new bill to be written into law. The new bill seeks a curb on the Supreme Court's power to void decisions made by the government, ministers and elected officials by ruling them unreasonable. It now returns to committee for discussion and could be altered before being brought for the final votes. Critics argue this judicial oversight helps prevent corruption and abuses of power. Proponents say the change will facilitate effective governance by curbing court intervention. Netanyahu, who is on trial for graft charges he denies, has played down economic fallout from the campaign. On Sunday, the Prime Minister signalled impatience with the demonstrations that have flared anew, while protesters promised nationwide disruptions on Tuesday. Outside, crowds of flag-waving protesters stopped morning traffic in major intersections and on highways nationwide. Some lay down on roads, while others threw flares. In the course of the scuffle with protesters, police roughed up a journalist covering the event. Photographer Rami Slosh, working for the Israeli newspaper of Haaretz, was pushed to the ground before policemen dragged him away from the protests. Protests were also planned at the main international Ben Gurion airport.
Now let's check in on the weather. The UN's meteorological organization says the first week of July was the hottest on record, warning global temperature will be higher as the effect of El Nino unveils later this year. Data from the WMO says planet Earth just experienced the hottest June since record began. The average temperature of June this year is 0.5 Celsius degrees higher than that of June from 1991 to 2020. As July started, global temperature continues rising. Citing preliminary data of Japan's meteorological agency, the WMO said July the 7th was the hottest day. The average global temperature stood at 17.24 Celsius degrees, 0.3 degrees higher than the previous record of 16.94 degrees Celsius recorded August the 16th, 2016. The temperatures in oceans in May and June also broke record. Meteorologists detected marine heat waves, that's MHW, near Ireland, the UK and the Baltic Sea. Meanwhile, the area of Antarctic sea ice shrank to record-breaking low in June, 17% less than average. However, this is not the end. According to experts from the WMO, Michael Sparrow, chief of the World Climate Research Program, said planet Earth will have more extreme temperatures and MHWs in the latter half of the year as the effect of El Nino is unveiling.
The first week of July, starting from 4th to 7th, could be considered as the warmest period or the warmest week ever recorded.
During an El Nino year, you get higher temperatures in the atmosphere as well because heat is moving from the oceans to the atmosphere. But as you correctly pointed out, we're actually only just at the beginning of that process. So El Nino hasn't had as much of an effect as it's going to later in the year. So we're seeing these high temperatures in the North Atlantic, etc., despite the fact that El Nino hasn't really got going yet. We can expect much higher temperatures from the El Nino in the latter half of the year in sort of October, November time.
Meanwhile, scorching weather is sweeping north and east Chinese cities and provinces such as Beijing, Shandong and Anhui in recent days, with high temperatures ranging between 35 to 40 degrees Celsius, triggering alerts and precautions over the disturbances it may cause to people's normal lives. Up until Monday, there have been continuous 23 high-temperature days in Beijing, setting historical records in the city. The National Meteorological Center of China said that if the high temperature continues from July 14 to 17, the number of high-temperature days will reach 27, hitting the new record. The Meteorological Center of East China's Shandong province has issued an orange alert on the heat wave for 6 consecutive days, which is the second highest level in the country's color-coded alert system. Data show that since June, the average number of high-temperature days in Shandong has reached 12.9, about 8.4 days more than the same period of previous years. Staying with the weather, temples and bridges in India's northern Himalayan state of Himachal Pradesh were damaged from floods today following heavy rains that lashed the region over several days. The state administration says floods and landslides triggered by relentless rain have killed at least 72 people in the region within less than a month and caused damage costing hundreds of thousands of rupees. Residents attempted to salvage belongings from homes, many which were swallowed in mud after the flooding. Many districts in Himachal Pradesh received a month's rainfall in a day at the weekend, said this according to a senior weather department official, as authorities asked people not to venture out of their homes unless necessary. Well, in the meantime, some parts of the United States are still under flood warnings due to heavy rainfall and the possibility the local dam in Vermont could fail. Deaths have been reported in parts of the country due to the floods, causing authorities to declare a state of emergency.
Oh my God.
It has been crazy weather in the United States, with floods reported in some parts of the country, leaving damage and destruction in its wake. Video footage from Vermont showed debris from a house washed away by floodwater in the town of Jamaica, as torrential downpour unleashed flash floods on the U.S. Northeast. More than 13 million Americans were under flood watches and warnings in New England, according to the National Weather Service.
I don't know what time it is, but it's right now.
Rainstorms poured water over parts of Ludlow, Vermont on Monday, leaving streets flooded. Flash floods caused by torrential rain washed out roadways, overwhelmed rivers in the northeast, prompting 50 swift boat rescues. Parts of Vermont had already received between 7 and 8 hours of rain, turning streets into raging rivers. Streets were flooding, power lines were down, and rescue crews could already be seen trying to pick up the pieces as flooding spread through New York's Hudson Valley on Monday. The weather already claimed the life of an Orange County, New York woman who was swept away by floodwaters as she attempted to leave her home with her dog on Sunday. From Sunday to Monday, more than 8 inches of rain had fallen in Stormville, a small town just over 50 miles northeast of New York City. More than 1,000 flights to and from airports across the region, including New York's LaGuardia and Boston's Logan, were delayed or cancelled on Monday due to the rains. Amtrak suspended passenger train service between the state capital Albany and New York City after flooding damaged tracks. Amtrak shares some of that route's track with the Metro North Commuter Railroad into New York, which suspended some service on that line and another.
Well, for more on the situation of the weather in the U.S., our Washington, D.C. correspondent Maria Bird joins me now. Hi, Maria. Tell us, what states have been affected by the torrential downpours?
Good evening. Yes, the entire Northeast has been affected by these downpours of rain, from Maine all the way to Vermont, all the way obviously New York City, and obviously the northern part of New York as well. These type of rains have caused people to be able to be stranded in their homes, and they're asking people to please adhere to the warnings that the state is giving in regards to being able to evacuate your home before you're in a flood zone.
So are we looking at, the downpour, the rains as a result, or maybe dams that are open, overflown, or some other structural issues, or people who live around these perhaps lower flood-prone plain areas?
Well, the U.S. is obviously trying their best to be able to recover from and to rebuild much of the infrastructure that is failing. And yes, some of it is due to the severe weather the U.S. has had, but not only the severe weather, but also just systems that should have been replaced by now. The age of the systems, the age of the bridges and waterways. And so that is one of the challenges that is being faced with these extreme weather conditions. But if we look at historically in the U.S., having these type of torrential rains is not typical in the United States. And so, again, with what we see with global warming, climate control issues, this is something that has occurred just recently as a result of some of our environmental challenges.
Indeed, I'm sure there's also a number of damages caused by the floods. I mean, one will be the damage to transportation, also the risks of diseases.
Yes, the real risk is, as you said, is transportation and the damages. Diseases, not as much due to the water filtration systems that exist in the United States. And then the individuals who are stranded in these areas are getting out within 24 hours. The real challenge is if it's life-threatening. Unfortunately, we're seeing more individuals losing their lives than actually having any severe disease or infections being caught as a result of the floods.
And Maria, it's rather interesting. We have other parts of the U.S. complaining of sweltering heat. I mean, these are like opposite ends. Speak to us about these extreme weathers that, is being experienced in the U.S.
Yes, when you talk about the extreme heat that's especially being experienced in the far southwest and also the western region of the United States, this again is due to what we're seeing with the wildfires. We're seeing, a lot of our forestry areas are being diminished due to wildfires, and we're not having the same type of vegetation and environmental controls in place to ensure that we're balanced. And so that is creating these extreme heat conditions. So this is why it's imperative that the president put forth efforts to try to control some of the damages to our environment.
All right. And finally, Maria, are people listening to how to stay safe, especially if you're in those extreme heat areas, how to, stay hydrated? And for those being affected by the flood, how to stay indoors or, where to call for help?
Yes, most individuals are adhering to the guidelines that are being put forth. But again, we know this is new for many, so they are oftentimes not sure if they should adhere or if this is just precautions that are not necessary. So we do have some who are still staying in their homes and unfortunately oftentimes being stranded. But for the most part, most Americans are adhering to the guidelines.
Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Maria Bird. Many thanks, Maria. Stay safe. We'll move on to other stories. A volcano has erupted in the Reykjanes Peninsula, southwest Iceland, near the capital Reykjavik, following intense earthquake activity in the area. Images and videos showed lava and smoke emanating from a fissure on the ground on the side of a mountain. The Reykjanes Peninsula is a volcanic and seismic hotspot southwest of the capital. In March 2021, lava fountains erupted spectacularly from a 500 to 750 meters long fissure in the ground in the Fagradal volcanic system. And Spain's Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and Alberto Núñez Feijóo, leader of the Conservative People's Party, on Monday held a fractious live television debate ahead of the national election on July the 23rd. The pair tore into each other on a range of topics from economy, housing, pensions to the environment, international relations and policies towards women, interrupting regularly, waving numerical charts, rolling their eyes and gesticulating furiously. The candidates cited different metrics of inflation, economic growth and employment to paint the incumbent's economic stewardship through the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine war as either exemplary or disastrous. Mr. Sanchez highlighted that Spain is among only a few European countries that has tamed inflation to below the European Central Bank's 2% target by 2023. Evidence, he said, that we are going in the right direction. Feijóo said Sanchez's claim that the economy was moving like a motorbike shows a lack of respect to Spaniards, citing people struggling to afford their weekly groceries. Both candidates ran into uncomfortable territory on their policies related to women. Still to come on the program. Chinese giant panda Huani gives birth to twin cubs in Yongjin city of South Korea. That's in a moment. The body of missing 62-year-old German real estate broker Hans-Peter Mack has been found hidden inside a freezer in Chonburi, Thailand, and that's according to local media. The freezer held 13 separate human body parts along with a chainsaw and other tools which were subsequently placed inside black bags and frozen. That's according to media reports. Forensic police observations there say several blunt force injuries inflicted by multiple strikes of a solid object led to significant wounds on Mack. The body has been sent to the Forensic Institute for thorough examination. After investigations, Thai police issued arrest warrants for 2 German suspects believed to be involved in Mack's death after he went missing July the 4th. Indonesia's Coast Guard says it has seized an Iranian-flagged supertanker suspected of involvement in the illegal transshipment of crude oil. The Very Large Crude Carrier, VLCC, Mat Armin 114, was carrying 272,569 metric tons of light crude oil valued at 4.6 trillion rupiah, and was suspected of transferring the oil to another vessel, the Cameroon-flagged MTS Chinos, without a permit. Footage from Backmala, Indonesian Prime Maritime Security Agency, is set to show the 2 supertankers conducting a ship-to-ship oil transfer July the 7th near Indonesia's North Natuna Sea. According to Backmala, both were trying to escape, so authorities decided to focus their pursuit on MT Arman, assisted by Malaysian authorities as the vessel sailed into Malaysian waters. In 2021, Indonesia seized Iranian and Panamanian-flagged vessels due to similar allegations. The captains of the 2 vessels were later put on 2-year probation by an Indonesian court. In Africa, a Libyan court has jailed 37 people convicted of human trafficking following the deaths of 11 migrants who drowned in the Mediterranean Sea. 5 members of the criminal gang were sentenced to life in prison. Others received between 1 and 15 years. All had been involved in organizing a dilapidated boat that was supposed to take the migrants to Italy. Rights groups say many migrants experience horrific treatment there, both at the hands of smuggling gangs and inside state-run detention centers. Libya has been plagued by conflict and chaos since Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was toppled in 2011. Limited access to film and darkroom spaces have hindered African photographers' ability to participate in film's global resurgence, despite the craft making, or rather having played a significant role in the region's post-colonial artistic history. MISA is part of a growing resurgence of analog photography enthusiasts in Senegal, with the aim of rekindling the country's love for the craft through film sales and hands-on development workshops.
From a concrete jetty on Dakar's sun-baked coastline, Senegalese photographer Amy Sarr clicks the shutter of her vintage Pentax camera, capturing the light of the horizon on color film purchased from the country's only developer.
Pour l'instant, j'ai que fait des photos argentiques de couleur. Ça me fait un peu peur de shooter le noir et blanc parce que
Dakar looks great with certain colored films because they really bring out the warm, vibrant colors. Film can be really great in Africa because in general, it's sunny and very colorful.
Founded 2 years ago out of owner Kevin Ober's apartment and the last studio of its kind, Lucelle, in the capital's Wakam neighborhood, nurtured Sa. After decades of dwindling interest, the market for film cameras and equipment is expected to grow nearly 4% through 2029, according to a study published by Precision Reports in May. Lucelle's mission is not just to develop film, but to educate photographers about the origins of the medium and show that understanding the analog process can enhance their digital expertise.
When they see the image they shot themselves appearing for the first time, it is always a treat. It teaches us a lot about the image, the way they look at it, and the way to manage it.
Aubert hopes to expand Lucelle into a larger space to house more workshops, exhibits, and even an in-house gallery. In the meantime, local photographers like Eva Diallo are already showing works developed there at some of Dakar's most prestigious art houses.
And inside a nondescript building in Seattle lies two telecommunication bookends. On one end, one of the city's largest network providers. On the other hand, a museum that transports visitors back to a time of rotary telephones and operator-managed party lines. The Connections Museum boasts a collection of more than 250 historical artifacts, including 5 large telephone switching systems, broadcast television equipment, multiple teleprinters that were once used to deliver news from wire agencies like Reuters, and more than 200 analog telephones of all types.
I think there are two things that make this museum special and unique. One of them is that it is an interactive experience. There are many other telephone museums. Most of them are just things on static display. You don't actually get to play with them and try them out. And here, everything is turned on and powered up. Almost nothing is behind glass. It's this very interactive, different kind of experience. The other thing I think that's special about our museum is that it is a living, growing, developing museum. There are also other phone museums that were put together by the same sorts of people that created this museum, and then they passed on, and now it's done, right? That museum is what it is, and it's never going to be added to again. Our museum continues to collect new artifacts, continues to add new equipment to our displays. We very actively search the country and the world for interesting objects that we think would be good additions, and sometimes we send our volunteers on cross-country road trips to go get those things. So it's a growing, developing place. Most of the volunteers who join us today have jobs in the tech industry where they spend their days sitting at a keyboard, typing stuff, and it's all sort of very virtual and intangible. And I think one of the deeply gratifying things about volunteering here is that this older technology is very physical and tangible. You can see parts moving, you can see the lights flashing.
So here in the Connections Museum, this switch is the only one left in the entire world. So at one point there were hundreds of them, several installed in every major city in the US, but all of them were scrapped, and this is the only one that was saved, and it still works. At first with this machine there was a huge learning curve, and it wasn't for the faint of heart because there wasn't really a way in. You know, where if you know how to ride a bicycle, you could probably figure out how to ride a motorcycle because there's a similarity between the two things, right? But it was really tough to find similarities in this machine with anything else I'd previously worked on. And when I touched it, more often than not, I just got a shock.
Shockingly retro. Well, finally on the program, a South Korean zoo says it recently welcomed the first giant panda twins to be born in the country. The zoo said the twins, both female, were born at the Everland theme park near the capital, Seoul, on Friday. Video footage provided by the zoo showed the mother panda in labor before finally giving birth to the twins. The first twin weighed 180 grams. The second, which arrived nearly 2 hours later, weighed 140 grams. The birth of the twins comes nearly 3 years after Fu Bao, the first panda to be born in South Korea, came into the world with the same parents, Ai Bao and Li Bao. China has been sending its black and white ambassadors abroad in a sign of goodwill since the 1950s as part of what is known as panda diplomacy. Congratulations to the new mom. And that's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.